Welcome everyone to Book Talks, a series of conversations with authors about their books, hosted collectively and collaboratively by Pittsburgh Theological Seminary's Barber Library and the Center for Writing and Learning Support. We are recording this event. Today, we welcome Dr. Edith Humphrey, a biblical scholar and theologian, whose new book, Beyond the White Fence, is a fiction book for children, published by Ancient Faith Publishing just this year. Check in your chat window for links to the publisher and Amazon where you can publish the book, purchase the book. Before I introduce Dr. Humphrey further, I'd like to thank my colleagues, Michelle Spomer, Director of Barber Library, and Tisha Wu, User Services Librarian, who have helped make this event possible and will be helping us to watch for your questions in the Q&A as we progress today. Barber Library staff have also created a series of library guides, also known as LibGuides, for our book talks. You'll see the link for the LibGuide for today's event in the chat. We encourage you to take time to explore that after we finish today's event. If you just click on the link, you'll go to the library's website where you'll find many resources linked to our conversation today. Also, before we move on, I'd like to thank our communications department, especially Melissa Logan and Robin Menard, for helping us to get the word out about our talk with Edith Humphrey today. I'd also like to thank our IT department, especially Bobby Jarsulik, who is behind the scenes right now taking care of any technology issues that might come up. Thank you to all of them. If you would like to ask Dr. Humphrey a question, please type it in the Q&A, which is on the bottom of your screen. I will talk with her for about 30 to 40 minutes and then turn to your questions. So please join us for the conversation. We'd love to ask her some questions that you have for her. Also, at the bottom, you'll note a live transcription button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to read along with us as we have our conversation. So now, I'd like to fully introduce Dr. Humphrey. She is Professor Emerita at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, where she taught New Testament and theology for 18 years, after years of teaching at various institutions across Canada and the US. A well-known scholar of New Testament, she will be teaching a Doctor of Ministry class on C.S. Lewis for the new Doctor of Ministry program in Creative Writing and Public Theology here at PTS. Dr. Humphrey has lectured around the globe in academia and in churches and is highly active in her local Orthodox church. In addition to being a talented scholar, she is a grandmother, a musician, and now a writer of fiction for children, which is an interesting turn to take. Edith, I'd like to welcome you and ask you a very first question to get us started.
Thank you so much, Dr. Overton.
You're welcome.
It's wonderful to be here in this format. Not quite as good as face-to-face, but still it is amazing what we can do in these days.
Yes. Well, I am so glad that you agreed to join us, and we are appreciative of that. And I want to ask you as a starting kind of easy question to tell the audience a little bit about your book. What's it about? How did you come up with the idea for it?
Okay, so I have, ever since I was a really young child, loved stories. I think read me a story, Uncle Doug was my first sentence, actually. When I was about 2.5, my beloved second cousin, more like an uncle to me, visited us when he was in seminary, and he was not tired of reading to a toddler, and so would read to me. And books were really, really important in our house. My dad was a teacher of English and history, and I was surrounded by books. And actually, for kindergarten, it was really an important thing for me to learn to read because I ended up being at home isolated with mononucleosis for several months, which is really strange for a 5-year-old. So by the end of that time, I was actually beginning to read some of C.S. Lewis's books by myself. And then it just grew from there. When I was a preteen, I actually was distinguished in my class for getting a detention because I skipped gym and took off to the library instead of to the store like most sensible children would do. So reading's always been very important to me. And when my children came, I enjoyed reading many, many books for them, with them. Beyond the White Fence just sort of happened, actually, like most good things in life. Summer afternoons that were spent in the backyard with my imaginative grandkids came to be fused with my growing appreciation for the saints, for those who have seen Jesus in special ways and can communicate his love and his grace to us. And it also fused with my settled love for the Bible and for fantasy literature. And so what emerged during that summer about, I would think 6 years ago, was an idea for a children's novel. The kids have been over swimming in the pool, and we've been talking about how fun it was down in the valley. And I've been singing to them about the teddy bears picnic down in the trees. And I realized after they went home that I could actually maybe write a kid's book in which children aged, I thought 6 and up. I ended up making 7 and up because my publisher told me that I didn't want to go too young, that they, along with their dog Haley, would go down the valley and have adventures. And the adventures that they would have would be that they would meet the saints for which they were named, which was a really lovely spread all the way from the earliest matriarch Rachel and Jacob up to St. Catherine. And then because it was my valley, I began it with 10th century St. Edith of Wilton, for whom I have a real appreciation. She was quite a colorful character. So the book begins and ends from the perspective of Katie, and she dominates, although the other kids have their moments as well. And she goes down the valley and meets St. Edith, who becomes really a kind of a patroness of all the adventures, because she gives to Katie a peacock feather that helps Katie to see. And that's one of the major themes of the book, is how do we really see what reality is like? How do we see this world? How do we see ourselves in it? And then various combinations of the 5 children and their neighborhood friend TJ, go down the valley for various adventures. And then they all are there for the final one, in which they meet Katie's saint. So that's kind of what happened. And the idea was to share with first my grandchildren, I thought, and then I thought, well, why not with more children, that this world is bigger than we can imagine, and that there are people who can see it as bigger and who can help us to see it as bigger, help us to see it more through the eyes of Christ himself.
Mm-hmm. And that really comes across in a lot of ways. And I will, as a reader such as myself reads the book, and I want to get to that, but I want to ask you, before getting to that kind of sense of time and space expanding dimension, if you can talk a little bit about how, I mean, these children seem to be modeled after your own grandchildren. I noticed that in the dedication to the book, you dedicate it for the first 5. So can you talk a little bit about like how you sort of drew on their characters, who they are in real life, and also on your own, because you make an appearance, or sort of the Gramgon, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Okay.
Gramgon's fine.
Okay.
With the Gramgon the Gray.
But you do have characters that are fairly close to your own life, and I'm wondering what that process was like as a writer, but also how your family has received this,
Sure.
Especially now that it's public and not just a family story.
You bet. I'm going to make you all seasick and take you over to show you a picture of the children on my wall. I hope that I can get it right. Let's see if I can show you. Oh, unfortunately, it's a bit shiny, but there they, can you see that?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
they're there, and the little wee ones just sort of make it in. This is about the age that they were when I first conceived the book, but I had to bring them up in age for my editor's pleasure. So they all came up about a year and a half, which puts the chronology of the family way out of sync, but that's okay. Anyway, so the children, they're themselves, but they're not themselves. I exaggerate their characteristics and I switch things around a little bit. But my grandchildren, I have 20 now. So these were the first 5. And they are all very pithy, feisty characters, but in their own way, they're all very different. So Katie really is very contemplative, and I really played that up. But she seemed to me to be the one, though she's not the oldest, but she seemed to me to be the one who really had to be the pioneer, because she sees, you know, from the time she was a little girl, she would ask really interesting questions. Like her father's an Orthodox priest, and she would say things when she was like 2 or 3, and she would say, Papa, somebody had read the Psalms where it says that God neither slumbers nor sleeps. And she had this cranky little voice, and she said, Papa, the baby God slept in the manger. And then her voice got even crankier, and she said, and the man God slept in the boat. So there's nothing wrong with that kid's idea of the incarnation, right? So she had that kind of from the very beginning. She's been that way. Whereas Rachel and Naomi are much more dramatic, much more into real stories. And Madeline is very practical. And James, well, James is just a precocious little kid. So not anymore. He's a young man. He's actually turning 11 in a couple of weeks. So this took quite a long time to brood. And so, I mean, I've used their characters, but as I say in my afterword, I've got permission from them to change it up a bit. And I had to ask, can I keep your names? And they all, without any hesitation, said yes, and their parents said yes too. So I was very grateful, which is going to be fun because when we get into the second book, we have 2 adopted children in our family, and we're going to do the whole business of being adopted and being an adopted child of God and so on. So that will be a lot of fun. And TJ fits in nicely too, because TJ in the story, and he's a neighborhood kid, but he's entirely changed up. TJ lives with his grandparents, so he doesn't live with his parents either. So he can empathize with the 2 adopted ones. And that's what I'm actually working on right now, is Beyond the White Fence again.
Oh, that's great. Okay, well, I was going to ask you about that, if this was going to continue, because you have more grandkids to feature.
if we do well in sales, I hope.
Yes. Well, great. I hope you do. So I'd be interested to know more about your thoughts on creating a series of spiritual adventures for children. So, you know, one of the things that I really appreciated about the book was that it takes seriously children's spiritual experiences and what might be important to them, or how they might process that, or how they might even just experience it in a group, so that there's individual experiences that some of them have, but then there's also this sense of them talking about it as a community of children and processing it together. And so I'd be interested to know more about your thinking on that, because I think it honors that part of children's experience that a lot of adults think isn't happening when it actually is.
Oh my, I think children see often much more keenly than we do. And I think that some little children have actual mystical experiences that they have trouble communicating. My middle daughter used to ask me who that big man was over up there in the chancel when we were going to our Anglican church. There was no one there. I don't know who she was seeing, but it just gives me shivers. So no, I think that children frequently see things that we don't. Children are people. And for them, they have not yet compartmentalized their emotional life, their physical life, their family life, their spiritual life. It's all one. And so I've tried really hard to make the times when the children are together in ordinary life, just as engaging, just as real, just as significant as what they see when they go beyond. Of course, there are some points that are very high, and those ones are when they actually do see things that aren't normally seen. And I don't want to spoil a book.
Yeah, right. I had to be careful how to ask questions, so I didn't spoil it.
but the point is, all of reality is God's reality, and children have a wonder about everything. They wonder about everything, and yet they're at an age where some of them are starting to take on adult habits, like not being sure that they believe in magic and so on. And so I honor that too. That there's a surprise that this is happening, and should they really believe it or not? Yes.
Yeah, and are we going to get in trouble for having it?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. And of course, I play with time, so they don't realize until they get home that hardly any time has passed, and they're sure they're really in for it. And so they're talking about that, and some of them get hurt while they're off, and they're wondering how are they going to disguise this and so on. So it's a lot. I had a lot of fun just having the family dynamics, and my oldest granddaughter Madeline was a little mortified that I have them bickering so much, and I said, well, is it unrealistic? And she looked down and she goes, no. And she, of course, wanted an airbrush, and I wasn't going to do that.
Yeah, that it seemed pretty true to life in that arena, just from personal experience with a bunch of siblings and cousins as well. Speaking of time, so you brought that up, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you, as a writer, played with time in this novel, where you got your ideas for thinking about time in some different ways, because it seems like in the novel as a reader, for me, all this stuff is happening, and all like overnights and all kinds of stuff in this sort of, adventure space of, going into the biblical times or going into the time with Saint Edith and so forth. And then nothing's happened back at home except they were outside the fence for, like a flash, and everything was kind of back like it started before they even left. So tell me a little, or tell our audience really a little bit about your sense of time and how you, where you draw your inspiration in terms of how you handled that, since it is kind of a fantasy novel, and how that device works for you as a writer, but also for your characters.
Right. Well, I mean, shamelessly, I'm sure that that the pattern, the model, comes from C.S. Lewis's Narnia stories. And I wasn't even really aware of that when I was writing it. It's just that I read Lewis when I was so young. He's a part of my whole worldview, really. I mean, when I was a kid, I had a difficulty distinguishing between Lewis and the Bible. Right. So, yeah, I mean, it's not that I don't think that time is insignificant. I think it's very significant. I think that the fact that God took upon himself everything that is to be human, including the need to sleep, including getting older, including as a child having to be obedient to his parents and growing in stature, means that it's important. God has blessed time. God has blessed our journey through time. And yet we also know from the scriptures, and I think Lewis isn't just making this up, that time isn't seen in the same way as God. So frequently, we have this big argument about when someone dies, do they sleep, or are they immediate, or are they hidden in some sort of halfway point somehow with God, but not in the resurrection, or are they immediately there? And maybe those are false alternatives. Maybe we're asking that question because we think that God and those who are glorified with him, those who have finished their race, see time in the same way that we do, so that they have to be in a holding place, or they have to be. We don't know this. So being able to play with time helps to reinforce the idea that time is perspectival, but it's still really important. You grow in time, you learn in time, you build relationships in time. So I didn't want to completely relativize it, but I did want to get across the idea that where the mysterious world is concerned, we just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
That
Well,
kind
there
of
is,
comes up at the end.
yeah, there's definitely a sense of both Kairos and Chronos here, you know, both happening. And so you can see that. And we also see it in terms of place, because the children are here in Pittsburgh and at Grimbrand's house. And at the same time, they're in the ancient biblical world. They're in Old England. They're, you know, in these different spaces. And I thought that you worked pretty hard as a novelist to render those spaces unique, you know, those places unique too. And those were connected with this temporal sense, or this sort of, you know, both the Kairos and the Chronos. I felt like there was a unity, or there were, you know, you were working toward that, a completeness of that sensibility throughout the novel.
It's really interesting that you picked up on Kairos and Chronos, because I'm actually giving a lecture on that next week in New York.
Oh, wow.
So this has been something that stayed with me for a very long time. And I'm arguing for thinking of God and reality as time full rather than timeless. I don't like timeless truths, because I think that it depreciates the importance of the incarnation. And one of the things I had to do was have some consistency with how they left and how they came back without it being boring. And so I did some variations. There's one point later on where it doesn't happen exactly the way that you think that it's going to. And in my second book, I'm even being a bit more risky. I have one of the children being in a kind of a in-between place. Sort of, those of you who know C.S. Lewis, think of The Silver Chair, where Jill is on the cliff, and she hasn't yet gone into Narnia. So Isaiah, my grandson Isaiah, is in a liminal place where he's meeting another little boy who, according to Orthodox legend, actually heard the angels singing, "Holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal," and they're talking about the angels, and they're talking about Isaiah the prophet. So it's kind of a time, not even in the past, it's a nowhere time. And they're having this. So I'm trying really hard not to always be predictable, not to always do the same thing.
Well, you know, speaking of those mechanisms by which they move through time and space the way that they do, I wanted to ask you, because these mechanisms also, I mean, like from a writer's perspective, you know, they're functional in the work, but they're also symbolic in the work. And so I was thinking about the fawns, for instance, that the children see that kind of draw them into this alternate world. The white gate that's the portal to the world of spiritual adventure. The peacock that helps them return home. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that as symbolism, how you chose those symbols. What do they mean? Do they have theological significance or other significance that you feel like is crucial for, that might help your audience think about how they use symbols in their writing or when they encounter them in other places?
So I want to say I didn't start with the idea of this is a symbol. These are just pictures that arrived and I used them, right? I saw the white fence. I thought, wouldn't it be neat? We could pretend down there. We could go down and pretend that we're, you know, with Robin Hood. And we see deer all the time, and we see fawns, and we see them with spots, and we're amazed. And they come in and out of our world, and they're very cheeky. They eat my hibiscus, and they're really a nuisance, but we love them. And so and the children especially are mesmerized when we see them up close, and we often do. That's one of the wonderful things about Pittsburgh. Never happened when I was in Canada, even though we were in wilder territory. Occasionally we would see a bear, but not deer all the time like we do here. So that's just part of everyday life. My gate going down a really steep valley, and the deer. As for the peacock, I don't have a clue where he came from. All I know is that when I started to describe Katie with St. Edith, I knew that she had a menagerie. She was an educated royal blood nun. She was in the monastery from the time she was very little with her mother, who was the abbess there. And she had exotic animals that had been given to her. And actually, The one record that we have doesn't mention a peacock, but it just seemed to me there had to be a peacock there. And then as I started writing and the peacock grew, and I realized the peacock's feather has an eye, and then I realized that it is this symbol for resurrection and so on. It just kind of took on a life of its own. But I didn't start and think, what could I use? These were just there, and they got woven into the story.
Well, they're really I mean, from a reader's perspective, very, helpful for a lot of reasons. And I kept, wondering in what ways they become, symbolic, or perhaps even if I, not knowing the Orthodox tradition, was missing some aspect of that. But it's also great that these were both in your real life, but also they came to you through imagination, which is one of the joys of being a writer, I think. And then seeing how those things connect, or how they are symbolic, even though you didn't know they were going to be when you started out. So
right.
That's wonderful.
And I finished writing the draft when I was in Hawaii, the summer in Hawaii that we spent 2 weeks there. And that was the first time I'd ever actually been able to observe peacocks in the wild and hear what they sound like. And so that became part of the story. And I just thought of something else. The beginning and the end have to do with crowns, because Edith could wear a crown because she's half sister to Edward, who's the king. And then St. Catherine does wear a crown because she's the governor's daughter, and peacocks have crowns. But I never thought about that, really. And then I realized that I actually do talk about the crown on his head bobbing in the same chapters that I'm talking about what really gives us what really is the crown. What's the importance of a crown? But that's the thing about symbols, is that they're not wooden, and they spin off in all different directions, and they just kind of happen. And so if somebody said, "Did you mean that?" Or I said, "Well, I didn't mean it, but it's there." Yes, it's there. Yeah.
You make of it what you will, reader.
Exactly. That's right.
That's our work to do, I guess. Well, so I want to also, before I ask you the next question, let me say to our audience, I want to remind everybody there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And if you'd like to begin to put in some questions, I'm going to continue to ask some of my questions, and we'll have Edith do a reading from her book. And then we'll take up your questions, those of you who are with us today as audience. So I just want to encourage you all to put those in the Q&A so that we'll be able to hear from you as well. I wanted to, well, let me ask one more question, sort of back down the road a little bit, which was we've talked a little bit about your family as audience for this book. And I was thinking about, as you thought about writing this book, and thought about who your primary audience was, what were you thinking? What were you hoping? What other audiences do you see now that you think, as it goes out into the world, other audiences that might enjoy the book? And then along with that, and so this is going to seem like a strange thing to tack on to this, but somehow in my mind, it's kind of goes together with this question, which is, do you imagine children reading this book by themselves or with their families? So some of these questions around audience and reception and the ways that it'll get read, or, yeah.
Yep. So my hope is that the audience for this book would be broad. The age is broad. A precocious 7-year-old can read it. I know that because my precocious Sophie is reading it. But I also have a 15-year-old granddaughter who has enjoyed it. And actually in her homeschooling, it was her book report. And I said, "That's cheating. You can't do that." She said, "Yes, I can." So she did. Anyway, I think in age, it's broad. I do hope that, though, there's a lot of, what can I call it? Inside Orthodox stuff in here. The children sing an Orthodox hymn. They talk about their homeschooling group and so on. That it will have an appeal much beyond an Orthodox community. I think that people might find that maybe even a little esoteric, a little bit interesting, like reading about an Asian family or reading about a family in Australia. Well, they're like us, but they're not like us. This is really strange. The very fact that they have a huge family, for example. And I kind of try to play up those differences a little bit and have people comment on them. Because the story, I hope, has incorporated enough what C.S. Lewis calls myth. I hope that it will be the kind of thing that will speak to a lot of people, because it's addressing yearnings of our deepest desires. Yeah. And if the children express it sometimes with an Orthodox vocabulary, the yearning is still there with everyone, I believe. So my hope is that, sometimes fairy tales can say it best. So right now I'm writing a book on mediation and the immediate God. And my argument in that book is that Christians won't squabble or fight so much about mediation, and even the mediation of the saints, if we start to think of mediation in terms of a characteristic of the church rather than a means to salvation. I think that's where the Protestants and Catholics end up clashing, is that Protestants think that Catholics are saying, without the saints you can't be saved, right? Whereas the way that I think it's most helpful to look at it, both in terms of the Bible and the tradition, is the natural thing for us to do in the family of God is to intercede for each other. And that doesn't take away from the great intercession of Christ. So getting back to the story, sometimes a fairy story can say that better. And by fairy story, I mean what Tolkien means. I don't mean a story about fairies. I mean a story from the land of fairy, a story that's fantastic. And there are things about mediation that you see naturally unfold as these saints come into connection with the children, as the children are in connection with each other, and as they move towards the grand finale, which I don't want to talk about too much, that picture how beautiful this intertwining of humanity within the body of Christ can be seen as, rather than it just being a doctrinal thing that we either accept or reject.
Yeah,
so I'm really hoping to draw people in to see something from the perspective of the ancient church that maybe they thought they had to reject, but actually it fits in with how we feel ourselves to be as one body. So that's one example, and there are others as well.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for that. That's interesting. And that makes me want to ask my next question, which is, I was thinking about this transition from being a New Testament scholar and theologian to being a writer of fiction for children. And that seems like a pretty far, a far journey in certain ways, like from a certain angle, and you're still
try moving from the Salvation Army to the Orthodox Church.
Well, that's true. So you're used to traveling big journeys, long journeys, right? Well, so tell us some about the ways that you had to adjust your thinking, your ways of doing things in terms of, the way that you are used to writing as a scholar, and then moving into this territory in order to express similar ideas, but in a different way that might be inviting. And the other piece of that is both the ways that it's different, but also how have you drawn on your New Testament scholarship and your theological work in order to inform how you've gone about doing this book?
Yeah, so I'll start with the last because it's easy. I mean, I began this book like I begin every other, researching. So I had this big idea of what I would do. I knew which saints I was going to deal with. I wasn't sure whether I was going to do James in this one, and it got too long, so I stopped there. And James is part of the story, but I didn't do James, the apostle or the brother of the Lord. He's the first one in the next one. So I had this big idea. I had some pictures, like the fawns, like the peacocks, like I had some pictures in my head. I had a few pictures of what it might be like at the well with Rachel and what might happen with Mary Magdalene, but I wasn't positive. I know Mary Magdalene had an interesting story, so I thought, oh, maybe when I get there, I'll enclose a story within a story, like Lewis does in The Horse and His Boy. So I had some ideas, but I decided I'd better research. And that left me researching the biblical times, especially for Rachel and Naomi and Ruth and Mary Magdalene. And then I had to research 10th century England. And I had to research Catherine and Alexandria. It was hard work. You'd be surprised how many things, like there are birds and animals that aren't found in places. There are flowers, right until it was going to print. The very last thing, I realized that there is no lavender. There's no lavender in medieval England, and I had to change it to sage. I still wanted a purple flower. So there were always things I had to work on. And I researched it very meticulously. Then I wrote it as quickly as I could. So I had the big picture. But the problem is, my model for kids is Edith Nesbit and George MacDonald. And even, alas, C.S. Lewis, for some people, it's too literary for a general audience. For some homeschooled children, maybe, some brilliant reading children, maybe, but I wanted to reach a broader audience. And so when I first sent it in, my editor wrote back and said, we love the concept, we love some of the vignettes, but really, you need to do this, you need to do that. I had to work on point of view, making that consistent and believable. I had to work on starting in the middle of things rather than, like an old children's book should introduce them all very slowly. Remember the Bobbsey twins and so on? You introduce them all. They don't do that anymore. You've got to start in the middle and then feed the stuff in little by little. And so it was a matter of doing that without dumbing it down. And that was really hard. Well, I had a lot of back and forths with my editor. She would want me to do something. I would write and say, no, I don't want to do that. And she'd say, well, think about how you cannot do what you're doing here. She would challenge me to fix it if I couldn't accept how she would fix it. And Jane Meyer, I really, really appreciate the hard work that she made me go through. I really appreciate that.
Was it, when you were receiving difficult feedback, because some of our Doctor of Ministry and Creative Writing and Public Theology folks are here today on this event. And I'm wondering, can you talk about what's it like to get feedback like that? Are you thick-skinned about it as a writer, or were you a little more vulnerable feeling because this was a first time to write fiction?
I was very vulnerable because this was my story.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a story. And she kept saying, kids don't talk like that. And I would write back and say, but my kids do. So yes, I was thin-skinned. And also there are some things that are my expertise and not hers. And so we would have to negotiate about some things, right? But it's so much a better book, my having listened to her and thought about how I can communicate with children today. And I really hope with the second one, I don't make the same mistakes, right? Yeah. And even things like when you're telling the story and you have a lot of dialogue, you can't have them talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. Even if the dialogue is entertaining, something has to happen, something. And there also has to be a stake in the story. They have to, there has to be something they're overcoming or something that's happening. And I think that for some, psychologizing the kids and talking about their maturity and so on would have been a major theme. For me, I see it more as a minor accent. We do want to see something happen to them, but what I don't want the readers to do is to get caught up in the kids. This isn't the Penderwicks. It's not Amelia, no. Ramona and Beezus, although there's some of that going on. It's about them seeing something other than themselves. And that's what I want to direct the readers to. So I had to have some interest in the kids and show some development while still keeping the focus on what I wanted it to be on. And that was hard. That was hard to do.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Satisfying two masters, right?
Yeah. That's, it's hard to balance all of those things, especially once you get all the balls in the air, because you have to keep touching each one of them so you keep the juggling act moving.
And we had sort of long nitty-gritty discussions, like which emperor is it going to be? And I argued with them, and I chose the emperor that I thought it had to be.
Oh, I wondered why you chose who you chose. Yeah.
Yeah, well, Maxentius, it can't be, I don't think, although some people say so in the legend, because he was clement towards Christians. It just didn't make sense. But the other thing we had words about, I wanted St. Edith, to move from speaking to Katie in the you to the thou, to show the difference between formal and informal, and and that was next. And then I found it actually, it was anachronistic anyway, because the thee and the you distinction comes in as a result of the Norman conquest.
Oh,
and
wow.
the echoing of English of French. It wasn't in Anglo-Saxon at all.
Wow, you're going to be a great trivia partner after all this research.
Only about a few things.
I mean, wow, that's kind of amazing.
So in a way, what she wanted me to do to simplify it, and I kept it at that, thee and thou, even it should make it sound archaic. That not having the distinction was more true in terms of chronology, but I didn't find that out until later when I started to do some research.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it is 4:44. I do have some questions, but that have come up, but I do want to invite you to read for just a bit from. I think you're going to read from the beginning of the book, is what you said you might, just so people can get a feel for it. So I will turn my mic off and let you give us a whirl so we can hear a little bit of it.
Okay. Beyond the White Fence. Part 1, Katie and the Princess Nun. Chapter 1, the Fawns. It began with the Fawns. Beyond the white gate, far down in the valley, there they stood, still as statues. Look! Exclaimed Katie and pointed. Following Katie's finger, her grandmother spotted them too. Oh yes, there they are again. Katie's grandmother walked towards the white gate. Maddie saw them when we were celebrating Canada Day, but everybody else was in the house at the time. Katie felt a bit jealous. Her cousin Madeline was almost 11, nearly a whole year older than she was, and lived near their grandparents in Pittsburgh, while her family had to travel all the way from Kansas to visit. Though Katie was glad to be American, she hated missing fireworks and treats like beaver tails on July 1st with her grandparents, who'd been born in Canada. She also missed the fun of feeding the koi in the fish pond and swimming in her grandmother's pool every week during the summer. Katie moved slowly down the backyard walk towards the white gate. Her grandmother followed. Oh my, Catherine, they're so young they still have spots on them. I wonder where their mother is. They shouldn't be alone, whispered Katie, tender-hearted as usual. Just a sec, said her grandmother, moving back towards the house. Maybe I can get their picture on my phone. Be right back. As her grandmother headed for the house, Katie gazed at the fawns beyond the fence and down the hill. A strange feeling of longing crept over her hard. Who would think that two little animals could have such a pull? Like the smell of apple pie when you return home, or the sound of the waves when you're driving to the ocean but can't quite see it yet, those fawns drew her. Katie knew she wasn't allowed down the valley by herself. Gram gone, her little cousin James's nickname for their grandmother used by them all. Gram gone had made that very clear each and every summer when she visited. Yet Katie's feet, almost by themselves, walked towards the white gate that led to the treacherous path. She stopped and considered, taking a deep breath. Then she opened it. Hoping she wouldn't frighten away the fawn, she carefully stepped through. And because she always liked things in good order, she closed the gate quietly behind her without even thinking. Slowly, she put her foot on one of the big stones that were set in the slope of the wood chip path as a foothold for anyone who ventured down. Then the next one. Then she stepped across the weird third one that looked like the cement stem for a large bird bath sunk sideways into the hill. As she slowly descended, Katie couldn't take her eyes off the fawns. They barely moved except to continue eating something growing in the grass. How awesome! Her longing was almost unbearable and made her chest feel tight. She didn't want to just watch them or take their picture like Gramgon. She didn't even want to pet them like she would a dog. No, Katie yearned to be with the fawns, to be friends with them, to be part of their world. She took a deep breath and continued down the steep hill. As she rounded a curve in the trail, her foot twisted and she slipped. She landed hard on the ground, scraping her calf on a rock and brushing her bare leg against a patch of itchy weed. "Oh," she exclaimed, and then she remembered the fawns. Had she startled them? No, they were still there. Her thigh was beginning to burn in a tingly way, and her calf hurt. Serves me right for coming down here without long pants. As she started down the lower part of the path, things started to look strange. When she had shared her Cheerios with the fish at 6:30 that August morning, the sky was already brilliantly blue and the sunlight bright enough to see clear down to the bottom of the backyard pond. Now there was a strange fog and it was cooler. The mist made her cheek damp, and where had all this ivy come from? The fawns were still there, but they appeared hazy through the mist, and so did their mother, who was now standing by them, and several wild turkeys. And wait, a peacock? Katie felt her heart pound as the peacock slowly spread its plumage. In the mist, it looked like one of those impressionist paintings that she would stare at for hours in her mom's art history book. But then he closed up his feathers and walked in a stately fashion to a well-manicured high hedge in the middle of the clearing. Where had that hedge come from? Katie didn't remember there being a hedge in the valley. As she looked more closely, she saw that this wall of shrubbery went about 20 feet, then turned at a right angle. The peacock followed the hedge, then disappeared through an opening. My goodness, what has Gramgon been up to? She looked at the long, clipped wall of green and the stately trees farther in the distance. No, she decided, this is definitely not Gramgon's gardening style. She glanced up the path to the white gate to see if her grandmother had returned. The gate was there, firmly closed, but behind it was a scene that gave her butterflies. Where she expected to see her grandparents' house, a red brick home that was rather old, over 100 years, in its place stood a different kind of building. What Katie saw now was positively ancient. It looked like a castle, slate gray, and somehow farther away than the house should be. The castle was partially hidden in hills and mist, but it was definitely not the house she'd left 20 minutes ago. She slowly turned in a circle to take it all in, careful not to fall on the uneven hillside, and glimpse some purple bushes she had never seen in Gramgon's backyard before. To her nostrils came a strong scent of sage. She found it hard to breathe, and her heart beat so hard she could hear it in her ears. Where am I? Where is Gramgon's house? Why on earth did I close the gate? That's enough.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I love the opening of that book. It's got a lot of energy to it. And so as a reader, I mean, I fell down the hill with her, so to speak. All right, we do have a few questions here. And I invite any audience members who have a question, who'd like to ask one, to please pop it in the Q&A. Greg Rapier, who's a student in the DMin in Creative Writing and Public Theology course cohort, who will be joining you in January, Edith, asks this question. At which point did your imagined audience affect your line-by-line prose? And how difficult was it to adjust your writing style to this audience?
Wow. Well, we talked a little bit about this. I began the story originally by talking about the four girls and who they were, and James's name for Gramgon, and their interrelationship and so on. And being rudely reminded of my imagined audience by my editor, I realized I had to start in the middle. But I didn't want to start in the middle of the adventure because I had to get them drawn in. Part of the story is getting drawn to see things. So it began with the fawns, right? Short, sweet, right into it. and kids are wondering why, what's going on here. So it also affected my arrangement of things. Originally, chapter 2 wasn't chapter 2, or not chapter, section 2. Oh, I forgot. Well, I'm remembering. Sorry to interrupt the question, Greg, but I do want to show you this wonderful line drawing with Katie and the fawns, and the peacock is at the top, but his wings are all, his feathers are all through that. I think that my illustrator, Emmanuel Burke, is just fabulous, and they're not all the same. Some of them are very comic. So I was actually thinking of the comedy because in the second story, there's another gambit in getting them down, and there's this action picture at the beginning with Rachel. But Rachel wasn't there in the second story. It was Madeline who came in the second story, and my editor said, would you think of changing it, because the second story is your most adventurous? And it is. The kids foil a plot.
They do.
And so she said it will make them want to continue reading, whereas the one with Madeline has some interesting points, but it's more sedate. So I ended up having to change it, which then meant that some of the things that I'd introduced, like the kids taking kerchiefs, the girls taking scarves down so that they could fit in with the older times, I had to figure out other ways of doing it all. So it meant really having to adjust the story in order to draw the children in immediately by a real plot. And also I added some things in the first story to make it more adventuresome. And I don't want to tell you what happens. But there's some danger in the first story that wasn't there before. Originally, they just went, they had this nice talk with Edith, learned things, came home. So learning to actually put a bit of stake in the story, even if there wasn't necessarily an adventure, that was hard for me to do. It's something that you don't notice when you're reading a good writer. It just happens. It's the same as if I sit down to play piano. It's only taken many years of trying to teach piano to different kids to realize that some things don't come naturally to everybody. And so what am I actually doing with my hand to get that touch? And how do I describe that? It's the same thing with writing a book for kids. You have to really think hard about how it is that you're going to maintain interest and what will communicate and what will not. So I had to be careful with the Orthodox flavor that didn't override everything, and that if there was something that wasn't understandable, that it would be explained. Like I couldn't use the word eson for the low chanting that goes on the bottom of the chant. So that's part of the vocabulary too, not just the structure.
Well, and you also made some choices where you would use words that many audiences would not know, but then you had the children describe, like I'm thinking about those musical instruments.
The yargul.
I was like, I have no idea what that is, but then we get an explanation basically, or a description of what it is when the kids are sort of asking, Madeline's asking questions about it of the young man, Simon, or the young boy.
And that's how you get it.
Right, so you get it that way.
But I didn't even think, how can I get this information? For me, it was fascinating to find out about a yargul. And Madeline loves music, so it just kind of unfolded. It's not like I'm trying to feed the kids things in a surreptitious way. It just kind of happens, right?
Right. That's great. I want to get back to the illustrations and artwork, because I have a comment as well as a question about that. I want to honor, and I'm watching our time, but just want to make sure we get this in. Bobby, who's our IT guy, who's paying attention. Thanks, Bobby. He says, wonderful artwork, like the passage you read. It seems to strike a delicate balance between appealing to children and a more mature audience, and really draws the audience into the world of fairy stories. So thank you, Bobby, for that. And I'd like to include with that a question that Michelle Spomer, one of our co-hosts, has asked, which says, what was it like to work with an illustrator?
Oh, how interesting. Well, just one comment. This children and more mature audience, I really hope that this book will be read by families together as well as by individual kids, sort of like The Princess Bride has some inside jokes for the adults. I've got some inside jokes. Watch for Beowulf. Beowulf is in there. All right. So there is some inside jokes for adults who are literary type adults. So working with the illustrator was fine. He would have, I said what I wanted, and he would gave ideas, right? And then he would do it, and I would say, well, no, that's too young, or no, it's not that kind of wagon. This is the one that I love the very, very most. Look at the look.
The camel.
Naomi's face.
And the camel's face.
The camel's cranky. That's the whole point, is that the camel is cranky, and there's Naomi being cranky back. And she never is. So it's just, we just all just died laughing with that one. So I mean, that's his pièce de résistance. At first I wasn't happy with the cover because he'd had James on it, and TJ is really not a major figure in the book. So I thought, but you know what I like about it is that TJ is directing us to the world, to the fairy world, to the magic world. And although there's not even really a point where he does this to Katie, he actually points it out to James, and we're not seeing James anymore. It doesn't matter, because the pictures don't have to freeze a moment.
Right. They don't have to be literal.
But there's something else happening here. And he's the oldest. And here's a young man on the verge of 14 who is enamored with the world of fantasy and pointing the reader to that, I think. Anyway. Well,
yeah, you really hit the jackpot with the illustrations. They are really, I hope you'll get some prints of those for your home or for your grandkids, because they're really incredible.
Idea. Yeah.
We have another question. I want to get it in right before we're done here. We have Sharon Taylor asking or saying, and I'm just going to read it out loud. Edith, I love this book, though your reading was my introduction. I ordered it for the Shadyside Presbyterian Church Library, and it arrived at 4:10 today. Very specific. Have you considered doing a video introduction specifically for kids?
Well,
there's an idea.
No, but what a good idea. I should run that by my publicity person. What fun.
That does sound like fun.
Yeah, they are probably going to do a audio book, and I am, if they do, I am being I'm doing an edition for it. It may not be me who reads it. We will see.
Oh wow, that's great. An audio version. How wonderful. Get to read your own book.
If I mean, it could be someone else who does it.
Right. I know. Well, there are people who make a whole career out of that. It's pretty interesting.
So Sharon, just one note, I want to find out what you think about the ending when you read it.
Okay, that's good. That's good to hear. Well, we're at 5:01, and I want to wrap this up. I hate to do it because we've had such a great conversation. And Edith, it really has been a real joy to get to talk to you about this book and about your work on it. I love the spirit of the book and the imaginative nature of it. I hadn't read anything quite like this for many years. I mean, for many, many years. I had read Lewis a long time ago, but it's been a long time. And I really did appreciate the opportunity to read it and enjoyed the thought process of like, ooh, I wonder if I could do this. I mean, it was super fun. And we appreciate your insights, both as a biblical scholar of many, many years, and as a new fiction writer as well. I know I and our cohort in the Doctor of Ministry are really looking forward to spending time with you in January for your C.S. Lewis class. I also want to thank Michelle Spomer and Tisha Wu, my colleagues in the Barber Library, and of course, Bobby Jarsulik, who is still here holding down the fort in the IT section. And thanks to you, the audience, for joining us. We will be back here on Friday, December the 10th at 4 p.m. for a book talk with PTS professors Jerome Creech and Edwin Van Driel to discuss the interdisciplinarity of theology and biblical studies in both of their new books. In the meantime, we hope that you will read Edith's book and send her an email or send her some kind of message about how you engage the book.
Even more important, send a little message to Amazon, just 2 or 3 lines. Get the
That's
readings
right.
up.
Yeah, that's right. That's helpful. And Tisha Wu has just put in the chat one more time to go to the Book Talks site about information on our upcoming Book Talk in December. We are grateful all of you spent your Friday afternoon with us, and we wish you both happy reading. And for those of you out there who are writers, we wish you happy writing as well. Edith, thank you again for your time. We are grateful to you. Everyone, have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.